Here are the most important things you need to be doing during the home stretch with only 6 weeks or so left until the upcoming August CFA exams. The first and maybe most important thing you need to prioritize now is completing mock exams, and a lot of them. When I was a CFA candidate, I scheduled 6 weeks exactly before the exams to focus only on completing mock exams, and I usually did between 10 to 13 of them, depending on the level. The reason mock exams are so important during this last home stretch is not because you're getting that much practice around how the exam actually feels when you're taking it, although that is helpful. The real reason doing 10 or more mocks helps so much is because it forces you to do a whole lot more practice questions, and those practice questions, depending on the source of the mock exam, are usually of very high quality. They're usually very similar to the questions you're gonna see on the actual CFA exam that you have coming up. And I really mean that the quantity of practice questions you do through the mock exams is much more important than the actual logistics of sitting through a complete total exam. I believe that so much, and I still do. I don't actually recommend that people treat their mock exams like mock exams. I recommend you treat them as more banks and banks and banks of practice questions that are really going to be able to help you hone in on which areas are still weak, which areas you still need to either refresh on from what you may have studied 6 months ago or learn for the first time potentially. And they're going to ask you the questions in a format that do replicate what the actual exam looks like. They're just going to start wiring your brain in this final home stretch to really be thinking about the world through a CFA candidate's eyes. There probably is some value though to duplicating the actual exam day logistics and feel and schedule. So I always used a live mock offered by Kaplan, which was 2 or 3 weeks before the real CFA exam. If you have one of those available to you in your area, by all means, I would encourage you to do that. But if you don't, you can just earmark one of the mock exams that you have to try to replicate the time of day. Probably do it on a Saturday. Time it out. Make sure that you have your pacing correct, that you have the mental stamina, I guess, to actually get through all of the questions on a CFA exam because they are long. I think just doing that exam logistical replication thing one time is enough. It's gonna get you comfortable enough with how the exam is going to feel that that you'll know what to expect on exam day. But depending on the level you're studying for, taking 12 mock exams could mean at least an extra 1,000, 2,000 practice questions. So that is gonna force you to get a lot more repetitions in than you may have been doing up to this point during your studies. Don't ask me for the best sources on where to get this many mock exams. Hopefully your test prep provider gives you 1 or 2, the institute gives you 1 or 2, you can buy more from the institute, and there are old sources online, links on forums and things like that, where you can find the released mock exams. The CFA Institute used to release the prior actual exam as a mock exam like a month after that exam sitting, and people recorded these online. You do want these exams to be high quality, so I wouldn't take one that like some of your friends from your college wrote or something like that. But in general, you're usually going to be able to get access to a lot of mocks if you look for them. Second most important thing to do in these last 6 weeks, if you haven't completed them all already, is blue boxes and EOCs, or end of chapter questions from the CFA curriculum. If you've listened to any of my other stuff on how to study for the CFA exams, you'll know that I didn't really use the CFA curriculum except for to do all the blue box example questions and the end of chapter questions. The reason that these can be very valuable in this last 6 weeks, assuming you might run out of mocks and assuming you haven't done them yet already, which neither of those things are ideal. But many candidates find themselves in a situation where they need to get more practice questions in, and even if you have completed all the blue boxes and EOCs, but especially if it was like months and months ago, it's going to be very valuable for you to do those. Those are usually, especially the blue boxes, the hardest level of difficulty of practice questions that you'll run into as a candidate. In my opinion, the blue boxes on average are harder than the questions that you'll see on the real CFA exams, but that's a good thing while you're practicing. It means it's going to force you to over-prepare, over-understand, or over-learn some of the concepts that you're going to need to know. Just be aware that the end of chapter questions are somewhat formatted similarly to how the multiple choice questions on the exams will be. The blue box examples are not very similar to the format or what I might call the style of how the questions are written and how the information is asked of you. They're really more for teaching and asking you difficult things that you're probably going to get wrong unless you have a really good understanding of the topic. And then getting the question wrong is going to force you to either have to read the answer key to understand what you did wrong. Or if that doesn't help enough, it's then going to force you to go back through the actual CFA curriculum and get a deep understanding and spend a lot of time, unfortunately, reading through that material to really understand why you got a certain question wrong and, more importantly, the correct way to answer it. Because of those two factors, they are very useful for the information they present, but they're not as good as mock exams are at getting you to get the quantity of questions in that you're going to need to get in, as well as giving you the sort of feel or style of how the exam questions are going to read. That's going to get us into what I've always called the secret to passing the CFA exams, especially the level 1 exam. If you're a level 1 candidate, I'm telling you, doing this last step is what will differentiate you the most, or give you the biggest delta between where you are and where you can get just by completing this 2-day step. And that is memorizing formulas. You need to literally hard memorize over 100 formulas, especially on the level 1 exam, because so many questions are more simple algebra, formula, plug in variables, get an answer type questions. What I did and what I still recommend is, if your exam's on a Saturday, you take Wednesday and Thursday, block off all day and just memorizing formulas all day, like 12 hours each day, 16 hours a day, whatever. You need to know them all cold, every formula that you think you're going to need to know. Friday is a rest day. It's very valuable to give your brain a lot of time to just relax on other productive but calming things in your life, such that you're not going to be burnt out on CFA material, or at least hopefully not burn out as much as you may have otherwise been when you wake up Saturday morning to do the real thing. I'll give you a quick overview of how that formula memorization process should look. I'm not going to go into all the details here because I have a couple other videos on the channel about specifically how to do exactly that. But you need a really good list of all the formulas that may be applicable in your exam. Maybe you have a list of every formula you've needed to use to answer any blue box, end of chapter, practice question, or mock exam question. That's exactly what I did, actually. I wrote them all down throughout the year. Any question, any formula I had to use to answer any question throughout my study period. And I wrote those into a formula sheet. They're available on my Patreon page for 19 bucks if you want to see the formula sheets that I used to memorize from in the days before each of my CFA exams. Some test prep providers give you a formula sheet. I would just caution you that while they are very detailed, they're, in my experience, at least the two providers that I've seen the formula sheets from, they are too detailed. There's too much information there. It's more than you need to answer questions correctly, and more than you can really stand to memorize in a 2-day period, at least for 99% of people. So you have to be sort of selective from what formulas in those formula sheets you choose to study. If you're familiar with which formulas you think you'll need, or you have a good formula sheet that you made or you purchased, or you got from Straight Talk's Patreon page, you want to know that it's going to give you a concise but holistic view of all the formulas that you need to memorize to be well prepared for your test. Then all you do during the Wednesday and Thursday 12-hour blocks is you handwrite each formula 10 times, and I would do groups of 10 formulas. So after writing 100 total lines, I would then close my eyes and see if I could recite each of those 10 again. If I missed any of them, I didn't write the formula exactly correctly, I would write that one 10 more times and then close my eyes, rinse and repeat. You ultimately, after the end of these 2 days, want to be able to handwrite and recite with your eyes closed every single formula from your formula sheet. Kudos to Mark Meldrum for this formula memorization process. I didn't come up with this myself. I heard him talk about it like 2 weeks before my level 1 exam sitting, and I did this myself. And you're just gonna have to trust me. It's gonna make the world of difference with a lot of questions that pop up on the CFA exams, again, especially level 1. Moving on from formulas though, one closing tip is just to sort of enjoy it. Now, I know that might be odd to hear me say because the last 6 weeks can be extremely stressful if you feel like you're behind. It can be very time consuming, tiring if you're not giving yourself enough sleep at night, which if you are behind, maybe you can't really afford to sleep too well at night, which can be a difficult trade-off to make. You want to try to relish in the fact of how prepared you are for your upcoming exam. And one way I felt and described it the day before my level 2 exam is I was sort of reflecting on and looking at the formula sheet I'd memorized on all the information I had learned over the prior 8 months or 9 months of studying. And I kind of went, man, certainly never in my lifetime have I ever had this much information about, 10 different topics all related to the finance field, all this well learned and understood and memorized and rehearsed in my head. I just felt like I was about to pursue this ultimate life challenge that was like this gauntlet of a battle that no one in the room could be at least that much more prepared than I was for this thing. And that sort of starts to be true when you're in this 4 to 8 weeks out period, because you've studied so much information and hopefully learned a lot of that even though you're going through these mocks and you're inevitably going to get a lot of questions wrong, as you continue to learn from those, it's kind of cool. Most of the hard work is behind you. Hopefully you're not having to learn new information at this point, and it's just reviewing and refreshing and some further understanding, deeper understanding. To be at that place where you're so like mentally accomplished and mentally prepared, a lot of human beings, and this is really where I'm coming from here, a lot of humans will never get to that level of academic pursuit and excellence in their entire lifetimes that you are at potentially right now in your life. So just appreciate the work you've put in so far. Let that appreciation try to sort of motivate you or excite you to go the last step here in the final month or so, and enjoy it, because it is a really cool thing to be able to pursue, and it's a really cool place to be, especially if you are feeling generally prepared for the upcoming exam. Best of luck. I hope any of the tips in this video may be beneficial to you. Check out other videos on the channel, please, if there are specific prep areas that you have questions about. And as always, thanks for watching.